Hi all, welcome back to Make More Bonsai. John here. Remember this little video last year when I received a box of Itoigawa Junipers from Round Valley Nursery? I promised we would return and do some styling to these trees once they had recovered from their journey. They spent all spring and summer and fall growing aggressively, which tells me they're healthy and it's time to rock. It's mid-February now and they are in full winter dormancy. This is a good time to do some styling work on a juniper. I chose this particular tree from the batch because this one has some interesting design choices to explore. It's pretty tall, with a fairly straightish trunk until it takes a severe turn toward the top. Much of the foliage is located toward the top of that tree after that hard turn. We could exploit these existing features and create an attractive literati-style bonsai, and that would be a fine choice really. And if we take a closer look at this tree, we can see there's one side that is more or less devoid of branches, basically a straight line from the top of the foliage mass all the way down to the base. This tells me something. There's an opportunity to strip this whole side of live tissue and have little or no effect on the rest of the tree. Nice. This will enhance that literati style with a very clean, wide shari. We could all call that a win and proceed, or, and hear me out, what if we were to reduce the height of this tree by about 12 inches or so and create a dramatic, twisted, shari-rich lower trunk and really challenge ourselves and viewers of this bonsai with something to capture the imagination and spark some creativity? What do you say, huh? Let's embark on a long and adventurous journey with this awesome looking bonsai material and really bring out the best it can be. Oh yeah, now this is when bonsai gets interesting and fun. Let's do this. To get started, let's prop it up on the old milk crate and do some basic cleanup. Remove any old growth that won't be needed, as well as anything that is no longer providing any energy for the tree. It's important to keep in mind that we'll want to keep as much strong and useful foliage to remain on the tree to continue to strengthen it after this training session. Junipers get their energy from foliage, so it'll be counterproductive to remove too much at this stage. After removing all the excess growth, we can clearly see the area to start the process of removing the bark and cambium layer. Let's start up as high as we can and see if we can learn the direction of the live vein and how it moves through the trunk. To pull this off successfully, we want to gently pull the bark/cambium layer to see which direction it flows and follow that line all the way down to the base of the tree. This will be our guideline as we begin the process of removing as much wood as we can to gain some flexibility along that long section of trunk that we're planning to bend to reduce the height. We're going to be removing a lot of this structural wood inside the tree, so we need to plan this correctly so that we keep the live vein active. There really is no hard, fast rule on how to remove this wood. We're working away as much of the stiff heartwood as possible. What will remain will be stiff enough to support the canopy of foliage and be flexible enough to bend past 90 degrees so we can coil and reduce the height. Once healed, the new growth from the trunk will thicken again and become strong and stiff. I'm using a combination of this trunk splitter that digs deeply into the wood to open it up for pliers, and then to tear away at the heartwood in a rolling movement. This follows the natural grain direction of the wood. It's important to note to leave the base of the juniper intact. If I were to extend the shari through the soil line, it will expose the area to the soil and it will begin to rot. Eventually, the wood would simply fall away. The tree will lose any stability at the base and no longer support its own weight. The shari will need to reside an inch or so above the soil. The heartwood that remains will be rough on purpose. Over time, this will age in a more natural-looking manner. You can see about 2/3 of the trunk has been removed at this point. I haven't dug so deep to expose the cambium from the other side. I'm just removing enough to make the area flexible and to bend without breaking. I am occasionally testing as I remove the wood to see how flexible it's becoming. It should feel as flexible as a branch would feel. It'll have some elasticity, but still be strong enough to support the weight of the foliage. Now that all that stiff wood has been removed, it's time to place some wire into the area that was carved out. I'm using 2 lengths of fairly thick aluminum wire. These are strong enough to help hold and support any extreme bends, and they will also provide some reverse pressure to prevent the wood from splitting when bent. These support wires will help minimize the damage and provide some rigidity to hold the trunk in place until the tree grows and builds up enough supporting new heartwood over time. There will be some wood cracking when the time comes to bend these areas, but the extra pressure from the wire will help keep it all in place. Now the wires are in place, it's time to add some further support and pressure throughout the length of the trunk that will help hold everything together and provide protection from breakage as well. Very often raffia is used when performing extreme bends. Because we've removed like 70% of the heartwood, there is some concern about moisture loss that I plan to mitigate by using some rubber gasket material instead of raffia. Raffia allows air to pass through it. It serves as an extra layer of bark and provides pressure to prevent breaks. The rubber gasket will seal the area to help maintain moisture as it recovers from this operation over the next year or so. The material also stretches and contracts with a lot of pressure. That pressure is important to help prevent the trunk from snapping during the bending process. While I'm wrapping the trunk, I'm pulling it really tight, then wrapping it over to maintain that pressure, overlapping the coil underneath it by about a third or so there's direct connection across the entire length of the trunk. Each coil around the trunk gets a gentle tug that I hold in place until the next coil folds over it to hold it in place. Now that we have a moisture protecting layer, I want to further insulate the trunk to protect it from breaking. For that, I'm using heavy-duty nylon webbing strap material. This is the kind of stuff you would use for a pet leash or strapping stuff on top of your car. This will provide that extra pressure since the rubber gasket material is really flexible. Applying this is similar to the rubber gasket, each coil overlapping by about a third with firm contact with the trunk. Then I fasten this all down with some electrical tape to keep it in place. This next step is very important. We can no longer see which portion of the trunk is the shari we created and which portion is the live area. We will need to know the location of each to inform us of which direction to bend the trunk. I'm going to use this white crayon to mark where the shari exists, so there's a clear delineation for us to follow in the design. I will plan each bend so the outside of the bend will expand the portion of the trunk that has shari exposed and compress the area that has living tissue. This way we will not be tearing apart any living tissue. It's important for the live tissue of the tree to remain intact for this tree to survive this operation. If that live tissue is severed, this whole operation will fail. We will need to maintain the connection of live tissue throughout the trunk, connecting the roots to the living foliage above. So the important thing to remember is to keep the live vein on the inside of the bend, especially one that pushes past that 70 to 90 degree point. Okay, so from here forward things are going to get interesting. Let's recap. We've wrapped 2 layers of tough stuff over the trunk. By doing so, this trunk, however flexible we made it by removing the stiff material inside the tree, has all kind of been negated because it's now surrounded by a material that can hold like 1,800 pounds and not break, and fattened by the rubber gasket sealing material. We're going to need to exert a lot of pressure and resort to some crafty engineering to work some well-designed curves into this trunk now. To accomplish this, the entire length of the trunk will be wrapped with some thick copper wire twice. Even with 2 of these wrapped around the trunk, in combination with the 2 aluminum wires inside the center of the wrapped trunk, the holding power of all this will probably not be enough to hold it in position. I extended the wire past the area that was wrapped so we can manipulate the upper branches once the overall height of the tree has been reduced. This way we can begin to place the apex of the tree and help push the design forward, using the time it takes for recovery efficiently. With the wire applied, it's time to get that initial push to reduce the height. This motion will be downward, of course, and in combination with a slight twist that aligns with the direction of the wire that was applied, essentially tightening the wire, but also displacing some of the energy of that bend across a wider area of the trunk. This twist will also allow us to get a bit closer to our ideal placement of the trunk by maybe another 20 or 30%. This initial push will take a few passes, each time allowing the wire trunk a moment to rest into position before making the next adjustment. While doing this, constantly checking the condition of the wrapped trunk to ensure it's all in place, and attempting to get the shari, the area that was stripped away, to the far outside of the bend, compressing the live tissue on the inside where it will receive less pressure to break. The second bend attempt is to better position the lowest portion of the trunk. It's at this point we seem to have reached the maximum holding power of the double-wrapped copper wire. So far, we've successfully reduced the height of the tree by about a third, which is great, but we could do better. Remember that crayon line that was drawn to show where the shari is? We can see this is on the outside of the curve, where we want it. A, because it will look better on the bonsai to have the deadwood featured and visible, and 2, the live vein is better protected from separating from a break. Now that we've confirmed the outside of the bend is all deadwood, we know we can push this a little farther, making that bend a bit more extreme and reducing the height even more. For this, I will need to set up a few guy wires that will assist in holding the trunk in place. Did I mention crafty engineering earlier? The challenge is to push the bends closer together while also gaining control of the direction of the trunk. For this, I will need 2 wires, one to hold the main bend in place and one to assist in redirecting the trunk into an attractive angle. The process of compressing these sections of the trunk together is similar to bending, but without the wires. You push the 2 sections part of the way together, hold them in place, then tighten the wire until it remains in place. Review the progress, and if there's still a need to bend it further, repeat until you reach the desired outcome. Or you may need to engineer additional wires to continue to place the trunk, all while feeling for resistance and ensuring nothing is broken. At this point, we're all in. If you're concerned something may have broken, that is the signal to stop. Alternatively, if everything seems completely intact, which in this case everything is going really well since we have so much protection in the form of rubber strap wrapping in place, all signals point to proceed with the design. Let's take a moment to talk about what happens when you perform a bend to the trunk as well as branches. The internal processes are the same. When you perform a bend, you're injuring the cellular tissue in that section you're bending. The outside of the bend stretches the tissue and the inside compresses the tissue. This triggers the tree to send resources to that area to repair and rebuild. The more extreme the bend, the more damage that needs to be repaired. If we take a look at the inner workings of the branch or trunk, we can better understand what's happening. There are 3 layers surrounding the core wood of the tree throughout. The inside layer is called xylem, which brings water and resources up through the tree. The outside layer is called phloem. Phloem transports nutrients created through photosynthesis by the foliage down through the tree. Between them is a layer called cambium. This is the layer of cells that creates all of the things the tree needs, such as leaf buds, roots, new cells that contribute to the creation of fresh xylem and phloem. The cambium cell divides, leaving behind fresh xylem and pushing out fresh phloem. This thickens the tree as it grows. When an area is damaged, like from bending, the cambium divides more aggressively to repair the area and get it functioning like it used to. This action creates more xylem, cambium, and phloem in that area, fattening and stiffening it to repair the damage. Over time, the damage is completely healed, and the excess of cells created contribute to the area retaining the shape it was manipulated into during the bend. Now that we've all been reminded that this is a living thing that has internal doodads that all perform all kinds of tasks to keep the tree alive, it's time to get back to exploiting our knowledge to manipulate this tree to our will. Let's take a look at the wires in place holding it together. They each have some rubber padding where they make contact to help prevent any damage to the trunk buried beneath all that wrapping material, and we can also see the crayon mark that delineates the location of the dead wood underneath. At this point, let's assess our progress. That trunk is resting at a really awkward angle. We can't just leave it hanging out there to dry all catawampus. I prefer the apex of the tree to be above in an upright position. We already know the 2 coils of wire won't fully complete the task from our past experience, like 15 minutes ago. To raise the trunk into that upright position, we're going to need to resort to some more crafty engineering to provide some resistance that will help hold the next major bend in place, until the tree builds up enough tissue to hold it upright on its own. This portion of the trunk is just under 1 inch wide, not particularly big or small really, but is large enough to require some mechanical assistance. The area that I plan to bend is partially within the range of where the tissue was removed to create that shari, and part of it is still whole and uncarved. This means this can potentially be a weak section in which some splitting can occur, so it's best we proceed with caution. Now mind you, we won't need some kind of heavy-duty hydraulic pulley mechanism to pull this off, although that would be kinda cool. We will just need something that will remain stable to help transfer some of the energy needed to pull and hold the trunk in place elsewhere, since the wire alone isn't able to do the job. I'm inserting deep into the pot a short length of rebar, available at any big box depot kind of place for a few bucks. This will provide the stability needed to help guide the trunk up into a better position for the design. So, after double checking just how much I can bend this trunk before the wire fails to hold, and confirming that we will need the guy wire, I'm going to prep some rubber to cushion the wire on the trunk and attach it to the rebar. Once that first wire is attached to hold the lower bend, a second wire is prepped to capture a second angle of the bend. Now, using the rebar as a guide, I can grip the section of the trunk and pull it toward the rebar, then pausing to tighten the wire to hold it in place. Then continue to slowly guide the trunk back up into an upright position. Doing this a few times brings the trunk back over 9 to 10 inches from where it originally was, but it still needs to be compressed a bit more in order to fully reduce the height to work with the future design. So, to accomplish this, another guy wire is needed. This one will attach to the lower part of the trunk to provide the stable resistance point needed to push the trunk further down. So now, using the 3 points of contact the guy wires are providing, 2 attached to the rebar and 1 to the lower trunk, slowly and pausing to tighten each wire as they gain slack, the trunk is lowered into a new position. These moves are small, maybe half to 1 inch now, each time pausing to tighten the guy wires and reassess where things are landing. The whole time this is happening, I'm confirming that there is still flexibility and room to move the trunk without breaking it. The rubber mesh wrapping is still holding together and keeping pressure on the trunk. That extra precaution is really paying off here because these bends are offering a lot of resistance. But because the wrapping is there is no breakage that I can detect. Finally, using the wire that was extended to move the flexible top branches, I can bend these final top branches into a position that will expose the top to sun to encourage new growth and form new foliage. These thicker branches that were bent will most likely be removed or become gin in the final design, but for now I want to keep as much foliage mass on the tree as possible so it can recover from this extreme training session with some vigorous growth in spring. The more foliage the better at this stage. Junipers really get their strength from their foliage. With this in mind, a speedy recovery will serve the tree best to empower the tree to grow quickly and firm up into its new shape. This tree has now been thoroughly reduced in height, with some aggressive bends to add interest to the trunk. This little "if there's a will, there's a way" demo is kind of an example of luck is when preparation meets opportunity. With a bit of experience and some practice making bonsai, you can recognize those chances to change things up and try to capture something unexpected. I'm really excited I got to share one of those chances with you, but this journey isn't over. This really is the start of what could be a 5 or so year long project. For now, however, we need to let this tree recover from this extreme operation. From February through spring, it will be protected from the extreme cold and kept properly watered so it experiences no further challenges. We can be assured that every precaution has been taken to minimize the stress to the tree before we proceeded. That combination of rubber and mesh strapping is firmly in place and supporting all the areas that were affected by the extreme bends. So, let's fast forward to 5 months later. Here's that same tree in mid-June. It looks like this tree barely skipped a beat since it was worked on a few months ago. Well, that's not entirely true. We're finally seeing some new growth starting to extend from the buds. This is a brief delay from what would normally be happening with a juniper by mid-June. This is what a juniper would look like in early May, so this tree is in recovery and starting to show signs of vascular activity, which is encouraging. I'm going to clean up any dry or loose foliage to improve air circulation throughout the branches. At this point, I'll be using a standard powder fertilizer that mixes with water at like half strength. I want to stimulate more foliage, and this stuff works fast and then washes out of the soil in a few weeks. This will help add supplements to the soil, and because it washes out quickly, it won't cause any extra water demand when it gets closer to the hot part of summer. We will need to maintain regular misting of the foliage at least once per day until the real summer heat begins to put pressure on the tree. At this point, misting will increase to twice per day. The misting will help ease the pressure on the vascular system of the tree to provide water to the foliage and help cool things down overall during its recovery. Now, let's fast forward again to late August. We can see that the foliage has extended another few inches and is beginning to create extended runners. This is great news. It means it's able to maintain what it has and is capable of adding foliage, which will increase the demand for resources from the roots. As soon as temperatures cool off, sometime in September, I'll begin to add fertilizer and see if I can maintain regular applications every 3 to 4 weeks until late fall. Throughout autumn, this juniper should begin to show signs of regular growth and improving health. Let's check back in towards the end of winter to see if we can release some of the guy wires that were applied the year before. If the tree holds its shape and is growing aggressively, the following spring, we can begin to gradually remove some of the wire and maybe some of the rubber and mesh protection to allow some air circulation. I am so happy to say this has been a very successful operation. We did some drastic work and stretched our imagination to enhance the quality of this tree, and so far it's recovering like a champ. I can't wait to see what next year will look like for this juniper. Thanks for watching. I hope you gained some helpful insights from this little video. Maybe like and subscribe and leave a comment below, and possibly check out the book or the t-shirt and the hat links in the Show More section below. Your participation and support really helps energize this little production and helps me dream up new cool stuff to show you, because bonsai stuff is kinda cool, and so are you for helping support this channel.